everybody. Gosh, I hate to follow Alan. He's so funny. He's such a good presenter. Yeah, so anyway, and I was super excited about seeing it on premise as well, the premium one, because I've had some people ask about that. So that's really good to know. You know, security wise, some people don't want to go out to the cloud for that. So, so yay. So I have all sorts of people I'm going to be turning on to that. So my presentation is the top 10 considerations for upgrade. Some of these are just general considerations. So, you know, I wanted to make it a little more fun. So, it's good because some of you have probably heard some of these things before, but it's always good to be reminded, especially as we move from one major version to another major version. So from 4.2 to 4.3, those kinds of big moves, there's some things to consider. So to make it more fun, I wanted to compare it to a family trip. Why not? Because, you know, everything works when you just try to compare it. Everything can be. So we took a family trip 2 years ago, or 2 summers ago. Basically, COVID happened and we decided not to fly. So we drove across the country, and this was the route that we took. I'm letting you in on a secret. For our Great American trip. And of course, our major things were things like Yellowstone, taking the kids to see the geysers, and we wanted to see Devil's Tower because we're big fans of the movie, and Deadwood was interesting, and because we were in Deadwood, somebody said you got to go to Wall drugstore, so we did. You look it up. But we went to the Grand Tetons on the way back, and then we rushed home. So lots of things we saw, and along the way, of course, you're spending a lot of time in the car, and you're spending a lot of time trying to come up with some way to entertain yourselves. And so we developed a top 10 list, like David Letterman or like what the late night shows do. So I took my top 10 list from my trip across America, and I took my top 10 list of what things you should consider with an upgrade or migration, and I mashed them together. So here we go. So number one, not in any particular order. Are you growing, or are you shrinking, or are you changing? As you go to a migration, you want to know, what resources you're going to need, and things have changed in your environment. So you may be growing. You may have all sorts of people adding into your system, and you need to increase your resource possibilities. You may be shrinking. You may be more likely changing your environment. So how I relate that to my trip is the whole concept of different things seem like they're most important, and then you find out that actually everything has its place, and everything is important and interesting in its place. So for example, you can see on the right is kind of the 2 screens, but the right picture is Old Faithful. So everybody, when I was like 1970s, I took a trip with my immediate family that I grew up in, and my mom, of course, had us stop, and we saw Old Faithful, and then we drove on. And when we went with the kids, I was not even realizing that there's this whole slew of geysers that you can go and look at. Old Faithful, of course, goes off like every hour. So it's sort of the one, it's in the, right next to the park rangers, lodge and everything. And so tons of people hang out there and wait for that geyser to go off. And you've got this big crowd that gathers and is just waiting for, a blowhole to blow some water in the air, or steam. And it does seem kind of that we're all waiting for that, but that's the excitement, right? It's like, so it's faithful, it's great to go see. And even though it's been around forever and it's kind of, known, and it's just a blowhole, it's still kind of fascinating because, there's all sorts of people. So it has its place. It has its, interest. But similarly, if you take a trip and you walk around, you can see like all of these are different little springs or geysers, and there's huge ones. You might be able to see on the screen, there's this giant group. There's these Superior and Grand. geysers, and they know ahead of time, they know like 24 hours ahead of time when they're going to go off, but they go off like every 6 hours. They don't go off on the hour kind of thing, or, you know, they have different timelines. So they do have a time that you can go out there. So it is kind of a known thing, but it's amazing. It's amazing the different types of geysers. They're not just one little blowhole. There's different formations that have happened, and they have all different names. All sorts of rainbow situations. So anyways, so, you know, new things that you explore are interesting in and of themselves. Things that are different are interesting just because they're different, but things that have been around for a long time, still very interesting, still very valuable. So getting back to our concept of, are we changing or are we growing, shrinking? If you think about it, you might have more just general user adoption. You might have an interest in going tablet ready with the Fiori with 4.3. So like a manufacturer environment client of mine has people walking around with tablets. The need for Viz enhancements might mean that you're now doing, you know, these amazing dashboards with web intelligence. So that might mean different resources to be involved in that. You might have different data sources, going to Snowflake, using JDBC key pairs, and, you know, to hit your Snowflake database. So it's lots of different considerations that could be that you're growing your environment and you're needing more resources for your business objects environment. But it could be that you're shrinking. Maybe you're deciding to move to Power BI or Tableau. So you're thinking of reducing your amount of licenses, or you're deciding to push data out more often. But what we're finding out is that more people are doing a combination of the two. Even if they're moving to Power BI or Tableau, they might be outputting, you know, big, huge data dumps from business objects to feed their Tableau or Power BI. And that, of course, you know, requires resources from a business object standpoint. Or they're using, you know, some other tools like Infoburst or Squirrel to do some dashboarding, or putting dashboards in the portal itself. You know, web intelligence document, they might actually have one tab that has a dashboard in it. So there's all sorts of ways that the business objects environment is changing rather than just shrinking or growing. And all of those are part of your considerations when you are sizing, deciding how many resources you need, certainly in a migration, but even in an upgrade, now's a good time to consider what changes you need as far as resources go. All right, number 2. Unused stuff gets in the way. If nobody's using it, it's people searching to find certain things, and then they can't find the report. And really, there's, you know, most environments, there's like a certain number of reports that are used all the time. You know, you've got all your daily schedules and you've got your monthly schedules and so forth. But so there's some that are getting hit all the time, but then there's some that are really valuable, but they only get run every so often. So you want people to know about those. You want to know where the important ones are. So it's important, as a first step of that, is to archive or to clean up some of the old things, and also applying limits. Certainly, reducing the number of instances that you have to only what you really need. Are all good things to improve your performance in general. The bigger your CMS, the slower your performance. But anyway, there's the idea is, now that you're doing a migration, cleaning up, archiving, now's a good time. In terms of the Great American Road Trip, the hay joke eventually gets old. So seriously, there's a lot of hay out there. So it was a general joke that we thought was really funny at the beginning, and eventually got old. So yeah, about 4th time that we yelled at that joke. So yeah, things eventually get old, and that's just the way things are. So there's options for archiving with an LCMBR. You can maybe move something to an archive folder for a period of time, and then plan to actually move it off the system entirely into an LCMBR file. The nice thing about having that sub transition is, if you move it into an archive folder, you kind of get an idea whether or not somebody missed it. So that's recommended. And then in general, just planning, maybe now's a good time to plan for regular archiving. You know, every year do a certain, you know, plan for archiving. Certainly setting limits. For a long time now, we've had limits available on inboxes, but I'm still seeing environments that I'm coming into that don't have limits set on inboxes, because that was something that wasn't available until later in the 4.2 environment. So making sure you have limits on your public folders to limit the number of instances that are kept, limits on public folders, limits on personal folders, and limits on inboxes. Number 3, it's a good time to set up data management. Metadata management is kind of what I'm getting at, but it's a good time to, along the same lines of, you know, letting people know about what's in the environment. If you've got too many things, it's hard to find, you know, the document you're looking for. But there's a secondary piece to that, and that's the ability for a user to say, hey, I'm looking for something that will do this. And so setting up some sort of metadata management where you are telling the users what's out there, what's available for reports. Obviously, they're familiar with their daily and their monthly, but a lot of those other reports that are just as important but are rarely used are good things to let your environment, your users know about. And this is, again, a good time to set that up, to have it be regularly updated and so forth. And getting your users, getting your power users definitely involved in, you know, setting up those descriptors and providing that metadata so that documents are more meaningful. In terms of our road trip, we did go to a few gift stores because we're on vacation. And of course, every gift store had a jackalope on the wall. I'm not kidding you. So generally, all these huge gift stores, there are many gift stores. It's amazing across the freeways of America. But each one has a ton of stuff you can imagine, and finding something other than a jackalope that you actually want to buy is, you know, piecing through all that stuff. So same idea, knowing what you have, knowing what's popular, making sure that the good stuff is front and center, but also that the back end stuff, or the less used stuff, that's still used and important, is findable. You can use audit database. You can use to get the usage for what's popular. You can use the CMS database to get an idea of ownership of reports, to know who's responsible for entering in the metadata for the data ownership and that sort of thing. So also the SAP support tool can give you some information as well. Number 4, plan time for what's new. New need not be distracting. So there are, of course, things that are changing. Everything's always changing. That's the world we live in. So in terms of a Great American Road Trip, every few miles there's a next exit sign, and they are oddly distracting. What's down that road? But it's important to try not to get too distracted, and be prepared for the distractions that are likely to happen. So for example, a lot of people are going to the cloud right now, and if they hadn't already, you know, a lot of people were on the cloud maybe already, but weren't on Azure or AWS. So, you know, so there's different, you know, they were on their on-premise cloud. So lots of different things going on there, ways of setting up the SAML authentication, Azure Gateway being used as a load balancer. So lots of pieces that are new or relatively new, that it's good to be familiar with, and to plan a little bit of extra time for doing those steps when they're new, because there's going to be connections and communications that are going to have to be worked out. Also along the same lines, it's good to get some things out of the way early as opposed to late. So it seems like a lot of times SSL certificates are asked for at the end, because really, you know, you're just starting and moving everything over, and nobody's actually on the system when you're migrating, so you're not too worried about security. But taking care of all that up front gets it out of the way. but along the lines of not being distracted, it's a good idea to keep in mind that there's some new things with SSL certificates. For example, they need SANs or alias names for Chrome in particular. And certainly if you're doing SSO, there's some very, you want to get a new account, a new service account, as opposed to reusing your old service account that you were using for SSO, because likely your old service account was not constrained, and you're going to need to constrain it now for Chrome and Edge. So there's some things that are things that you can do up front and save yourself some time. As well as just planning for that extra time for the connectivities and things like that that are that people are just finding new in terms of moving to the cloud. All right, number 5, plan time for workarounds. So there are some deprecated products. Deprecated is sort of in quotes with BusinessObjects, but there's some truly things that you need to consider. And then also just dealing with known issues. So getting familiar with finding the list of known issues for each version anytime you do a migration. So there is a known issues list that's available every time they come up with a new service pack. So getting a list of that and kind of seeing if any of it matters for you. The deprecated items, things like multi-source universes, those have been, you'd have to bring them back to single source. So if you've got IDT where, in the past they made a big deal about being able to have SQL Server and Oracle combined together into one universe for a multi-source universe, but now there's so many other ways to do that it's not necessary. So they've moved it off of that. And they aren't supporting it. So if you have any multi-source, you'll want to have some time in your migration to get off of that dependency and move them back to single sources that maybe use data that's been warehoused in some way. Web service. So if you've got web intelligence that you're outputting as a web service or query as a web service, are being replaced by OData or RESTful SDK use. OData, from what we've seen so far, not super great for that because there's some issues with prompting. So those are things that you want to keep in mind, that if you've got those in heavy use, you'll want to have some extra time for migration purposes to, use other options or figure out which options you're going to use to replace them. Avoid client tools on server. SAP doesn't want you to do that anymore. I assume this is because all the client tools are 64-bit, which is a good thing. But it does mean that a lot of us that are doing VMing into environments, it's a good idea to have a separate, sort of client tools VM that we can access instead of going into the server and using the client tools from there. So SAP has said that they're not supporting that anymore. They never really liked it, but they supported it. So it's a good time to change that up. And as far as our Great American Road Trip goes, yes, indeed, we did get a speed ticket while we were out there, and it was one of those 25-mile-an-hour zones where you could see the 45-mile-an-hour zone just down the road. Top 10, number 6. So trust your trusted sources. There's a secondary number 7 that's coming up on the untrusted, or not necessarily untrusted, but trust your trusted sources. So the example on the road trip, we actually were using our GPS, of course, and took some shortcuts. And one of the shortcuts led us to Route 5.5, which to me, I didn't realize existed. But yes, there were, tractors on this gravel road, but we did get to our destination and we did get time shaved off. So yay, GPS in that sense, as long as we didn't break down and because nobody else was on that road. But along the same lines, it is good to trust some of the trusted sources. So you have your admin guide, you have your installation guide, you have the knowledge bases, and each of the knowledge bases are probably more up to date as sources than the admin guide and the installation guides. But you know, in general, both excellent sources to use. In each in the knowledge base, there's master knowledge bases. Just type in master and you would as a search, and you'll get all the different master knowledge bases, and those are good to have just available because you'll use them. Also, there's a list of prerequisites that for some reason a lot of people don't follow when they do installs. People are very knowledgeable about turning off the antivirus, but there are a whole other, you know, bunch of things like the data extraction, setting that, and the user notification. And there's a list of prerequisites that are recommended in the installation. And it's a good idea because we have seen some files not get copied into the server when you migrate, you know, when you've installed, if you don't do that. So, and missing a file is, you know, is a terrible thing to try to figure out or troubleshoot. So yes, highly recommend you, and that's in one of the knowledge base. There's a knowledge base that has a list of the prerequisites. That's also in the installation guide. I've also noticed one of the things that is not in the installation guide is the Windows Defender, turning off the apps scanning when you do the installation as well. So that's not in there, but I've come across that and is now part of my steps. Also the PAM, so the platform guide of what versions of corresponding software are allowed. It's a really good idea to keep that in your back pocket and make sure that you're compatible as far as all the other tools that you're using in conjunction with BusinessObjects. So make sure that your databases are up to date and all those kinds of things, all your drivers, etc. So trust and follow them, and they will get you there, even if you're on Route 5.5.
Quick question, Amy.
Yeah.
For multi-source UNXs,
Yes.
Is that still an option using IDT?
Yeah, so that was the deprecated item, and it's not an option in SP02. So they have deprecated that. So the idea is to go to single, and the way you would do that, if you actually do have some data in SQL Server or Oracle, you would have to warehouse them in some way.
Got it. So it's gone.
Yeah. All right. So number 7, review past experience. So a couple of options here. In terms of our road trip, this corresponded with the fact that history is taught via kiosks at rest stops. Lots of things you can learn at kiosks at rest stops. So on the Great American Road Trip. But along the lines, pattern books are still available and interesting to walk through and look at to get an idea of what architectures or different architectures and what steps they followed. Blogs and wikis are out there as well. There are several blogs that are ones that are my go-to blogs, and there's several individuals that write things that I've also tagged as people that I'm interested in following because they are super smart. So so I highly recommend those as things to just keep track of and to look up. But keep in mind as opposed to the things that SAP puts out in terms of their knowledge base and their guides, a lot of the blogs are written by individuals that are not SAP related, and some of these are older blogs that are from 2013, 2000. BusinessObjects has been around a long time. So keep in mind that some of the past experience worked in the past and is not current. So just take all that with a grain of salt and try to keep up on what's current instead. Oh, one of the things that was noted in terms of past experience was in documentation. I did have a client who had some documentation from previous migrations, and one of the things that the users really didn't like was that when they migrated over, they didn't know where any of their documents were because they had always been using their recently used documents and just linking there from their homepage. So, you know, we can resolve that up front, right? So knowing that past experience, we can give the users the locations of the documents that they're using, just by doing a report from an audit from the audit database on usage. So number 8, it's a good time to introduce goodies. So change is tough for a lot of people, and even if it's good change, it's too, you know, you can if you're constantly changing, that's really hard, usually harder for people than giving a bunch of changes all at once. So if you're already doing a migration, let's introduce some stuff that we've been wanting to introduce for a long time. So there's all sorts of goodies that you can introduce now, in terms of the Great American Road Trip. Ice cream for lunch, totally reasonable. So there's new things within the 4.2 or the 4.3 SP2 environment. There's data source credentials per group that you can set. There's that, so that those are kind of an interesting feature now. There's all sorts of new things within the RESTful SDK. They've been around for a little bit of time, but you know, it just exploded in the last few years. And so there's lots of scripts that are available using the RESTful SDK that you could invoke. There's some scripts, JavaScripts as well, that are free downloads. I did a presentation on that before. You can look that up. So it's a good time to introduce those though. Workflow Assistant has some bulk moves, things like repointing web intelligence documents. So that if you're, you know, doing a conversion of your universes to IDT from UNV to UNX, the Workflow Assistant can help you with repointing the Webby documents that are pointed to the UNV and repointing them to the UNX, those kinds of things. Lots of options there that make that move to IDT simpler. New data sources, tons of new data sources that you could now start using. So lots of options there. Secure destinations by group. So there's in the past, some people have not wanted to put certain destinations as available with their adaptive job server, but now you can, there's security settings for each destination type. That's been around for like a lot last year or so, but so it's not brand new with this service pack, but it is something that now's a good time to introduce it. So it may be you just want file share to be available to this one group. You know, they can schedule to a file share, but you don't want everybody to schedule to a file share. You can do that. So so that's a good thing to introduce now. There's the font alias XML now accepts multiple new fonts. Before it was just one new font. So so you can do, you know, a lot. You can kind of explode there as well. So that's just a lot of different things. The point is that now's a good time to have ice cream for lunch. So here's just a walkthrough of the Workflow Assistant, and I think I'm running close on time, so I'll just continue through.
Yeah, you are, Amy. If you could try and wrap up the last 2 in the next couple of minutes, that'd be great.
I only have 2 more. So yes, so document everything. So the point of that is basically not just document everything, not just throwing bugs at a windshield, but to actually document why you did things. So if you make any changes in terms of the properties in the servers, or for you make any changes in the security, knowing why you did something, knowing what the test case was, is very important for the future. For example, you know, knowing that you set security this way because you wanted the users to be able to do this, will be very important in case, you know, the way that BusinessObjects works is different in the future, and you still want that workflow to be the case, but the security can be set up differently and maybe better. So those are things that actually documenting the why is important. And lastly, developers will need training. Absolutely. In terms of the Great American Road Trip, we didn't do a lot of exercise except for maybe a few walks, but But definitely you do have to train your developers with this new version because it's totally different. You saw Alan even, who's an excellent web intelligence person is, where is this? And so it's a lot of where is this now sorts of changes, and those all need training involved. Administrators don't need very much. But you might also want, because the portal is very different. So if you have users coming into the portal, you may also want some just an introductory half day or a couple hour portal introduction for those people as well. And I will go through. So there's the 10 things and one extra. Where towns are all just the right size to have a letter on a hill. Oh, so sad. I want my town to have a letter on the hill. And that number 11 corresponds to now's a good time for dashboarding. And you've already heard it from Alan, and you're going to hear some more, but definitely the whole dashboarding side of business objects has exploded, obviously with the need for Viz, but also just the way that they're allowing things for big screen and for refreshes that are, based on 5 seconds. You can have a screen refresh the data every 5 seconds. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that make big dashboards from business objects, absolutely a thing to do. So anyway, that's it. So I hope you were inspired.
Very clever there, squeezing in number 11. I had no idea. Okay, there were a couple of questions. Do you recommend in-place upgrade from 4.2, or would you advise installing 4.3 on new servers?
Yeah, I have to say that I'd advise moving to a new server. A lot of people that are on 4.2 are on Windows 12, 2012 R2. So Windows, 2019 is a good reason in and of itself to move over. If you're on Linux or one of the others, it's the same sort of scenario where your operating system, upgrading your operating system, and upgrading an operating system in place involves recreating the SIA. And it's possible to do, but having to do that in place is fraught with some pieces that you could potentially mess up. So I would say that it's just because of the operating system is one of the major reasons, but also just like what we talked about at the beginning, everything's changing. How the resources you're using is changing. Going to the cloud is, maybe different. So a lot of those things are all reasons to migrate as well. So there's just so many reasons to migrate now that unless you were really, I mean, you can upgrade in place, but unless you were really, there was a compelling reason to stay to upgrade in place, I would recommend this is a good time to migrate.
Yeah, I think there might be a couple of exceptions if a customer was at
Right.
Service Pack 8 or 9 and they were on the most current versions of the underlying operating systems and so forth.
Yeah.
An in-place upgrade would be appropriate. So another question was, did they deprecate any of the Java SDK, or is it still there in 4.3?
The Java SDK is still there. So the server, all those scripts, the Java scripts, that underlying server setting is still there. It's just not the applet, just the front end stuff. So you don't need Java installed on anybody's client, any client desktop.
Okay, excellent. I think we got through all the questions. Love the presentation, Amy, especially the tie-in with the Great American Road Trip there, because I now think that everyone wants to go on a Great American Road Trip after listening to your presentation. Maybe minus the speeding ticket and the bugs on the windshield, but it was very nicely done. So great job. Thank you so much.